Hi there. My name's Caitlin Fritz, and I'm an award-winning entrepreneur and business coach. Welcome to Everyday Entrepreneurship. Today I have the amazing Joe Seddon. Let's recheck. Is that how I pronounce your last name?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, just
All
making
good.
sure. I get very self-conscious about names. So today we have the amazing Joe Seddon, the founder of Zero Gravity, with us today. So welcome, Joe.
Great to be with you, Caitlin. Looking forward to the episode.
So let's take it on back because I know you've shared your story of where Access Oxbridge, now Zero Gravity, stemmed from. But take me back to those days when you were a student. What inspired you to kind of change this whole narrative of access to education?
I think it all goes back to my own personal story, really, which is I grew up in a small town in the UK called Morley, which is between Leeds and Wakefield in West Yorkshire. It's a sort of post-industrial town, sort of place that political commentators would label a red wall seat. And I grew up in a single parent background. My mum's a speech therapist in the NHS. In fact, most of my family members work in the NHS. And I made a journey from state schools to Oxford University, where I studied PPE, which stands for Philosophy, Politics and Economics, not Personal Protective Equipment, which is the mistake everyone makes nowadays. And I just saw firsthand, to be honest, just how big the barriers were for students like me to break into elite institutions, not just universities, but apprenticeships and graduate careers as well. And when I sort of spoke to a lot of my friends about it and reflected on my own journey, it almost felt like there was some kind of gravitational force holding you down, whether that was financial anxiety, the not being able to afford to pay for tutors or textbooks or extra educational resources, coming from an area with little opportunity, poor transport links, socio-economic deprivation, family issues, like all of those things, they all combine to create this sense that the background you're from dictates your success in life. But I don't think things have to be that way. And when I started Zero Gravity, I'd set out to try and change the way things work, unlock talent from low opportunity areas and empower them into these elite institutions. So the idea in many ways goes back to my own personal story, but I'm not unique. I'm not an outlier. There's hundreds of thousands of people like me, dotted all across the UK, who are currently experiencing that journey right now. And I wanted Zero Gravity to be the kind of solution for those people.
I love that because where I grew up in the US, it's a similar steel town kind of an area where I think, less than 1 in 10 actually go to university. And I think around the world we have these pockets of really huge potential with young children's, young adults. But once again, it is that access. So then how did this journey start? Because it was before Access Oxbridge. So were you the typical tinkering in a dorm room building an app? Like, what did it look like from boots on the ground?
So when I came to graduate from university, I always knew I wanted to be a tech entrepreneur. That was my big passion, which was quite a strange thing to do at the time because when I grew up in Morley in West Yorkshire, I was always interested in technology and startups. It was almost like a little dirty secret because I didn't want to admit to any of my friends that I was kind of interested in that stuff because it just wasn't stuff that people were talking about. Like not a normal sort of passion or pastime for like a 13, 14-year-old boy. But I knew that was what I wanted to do. And when I graduated from university, I had a number of different graduate job offers, become a lawyer, work in a hedge fund. But I decided to turn those down and move back in with my mum, essentially in West Yorkshire. And that is where Zero Gravity was born from. And that decision looks smart now, but back in the day, it was incredibly high risk and wasn't actually something that many people thought was a good idea. That even my closest friends and family members thought I was completely nuts for giving up a kind of steady, stable graduate career, climbing the kind of corporate ladder for a very uncertain future in startup life. And I think that's one of the difficulties in entrepreneurship, which is people don't respect it as a career decision until you have all the kind of hallmarks and credibility signals of success. Now, when you're first starting off, especially in the UK, there's a lot of skepticism about pursuing that career path. Now, indeed, in Yorkshire, there's a kind of joke that if you describe yourself as an entrepreneur, that's just another way of saying you're unemployed, and which is probably what most people perceive me to be doing. They're just trying to find an excuse not to get a proper job. And when I first launched Zero Gravity, you're right, back in the day, it was named Access Oxbridge. And that's because I just wanted to get a product out there in the world that people would use and get insights directly from users about whether it was something that was worth pursuing or not. And when I thought about how to bring my kind of grand vision, which I just spoke about, down to earth, I decided to start on the ecosystem I understood best, and that was Oxford and Cambridge University. So that the first iteration of Zero Gravity products was just focusing on getting students from low opportunity backgrounds into Oxbridge, and I named that kind of pilot product Access Oxbridge. So it wasn't the sexiest, most glamorous name in the world, and the technology wasn't the most sexiest technology either, but it was good enough to get going and start getting the insights about actually, is this something that people want and which parts of it do they find valuable? So my advice to any early stage entrepreneurs would be ditch the perfectionism that is kind of instilled in you by the academic system. Just get going and get something out there. And these things like product, brand, marketing, building beautiful systems, these things really, really matter in the long term, and you should be thinking about those. But don't let analysis paralysis hold you back. At the beginning, you just need to move quickly and get a product into the hands of people, and that's the approach that I took. Not consciously, but probably accidentally. I was so kind of eager and keen as a 21-year-old founder to get going. I just kind of did this intuitively, but looking back, I think it's probably one of the best decisions that I made.
No, I think you're totally right. I think we are kind of instilled with this rubric, and there is no rubric when you launch your first product. It is messy. It is everything kind of, hodgepodge together. I know my first app was as well. But getting that feedback is so critical, especially before, you raise funds and you grow. But I think it's really interesting because you talked about, having this desire to be a tech entrepreneur, and you kind of don't fit that, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos mold, because Zero Gravity is a social enterprise. So what led you down that kind of social enterprise, entrepreneurship, tech for good routes?
Well, the reason I became an entrepreneur is I never really wanted to make loads of money. That was not the driving force behind my entrepreneurship. I wanted to solve the problems that out there in the real world that will make a real difference to people's lives. And that sounds a little bit cliche and grandiose, but that is the thing that kind of gets me out of bed in the morning, feeling that I'm making an impact and having a difference on a topic or issue that I've experienced firsthand myself. And I think a lot of great businesses start from those seeds, and they're not trying to create something that leads to a profit or leads to loads of shareholder value, but just actually doing something cool that solves a problem. So that's where my drive to do this came from. And I actually think that is a winning approach, because I think when you obsess about understanding a problem and building a solution, you actually create something that's far more valuable in the long term than kind of worrying about pinching pennies. I think with a startup, being too revenue profit focused too early, it can actually be a really bad thing and kind of veer you off course, and you start chasing money without thinking about the long-term implications of some of the choices that you're making. So I actually think being a mission-driven entrepreneur is a competitive advantage. I don't really see it as a kind of restraint on what we're doing. I actually see it as the core of our business success, not just our kind of social impact success. Because the other thing you really get being a mission-driven business is your brand is far more compelling, because people emotionally connect far more with businesses that have a clear mission behind them than just businesses which are very bricks and mortar and not doing anything that has a tangible impact on society and the things people care about. But the other thing as well is it's a great way to attract incredible people towards you, whether that's the people you want in your team, investors, clients. Having a clear mission is like a calling card that actually provokes interest in what you're doing, and that enables you to build a team of the best people around you. And in the long term, your business success is defined by the people you can bring to the table. Like at the beginning, you may be a one-man band in the bedroom, but the thing that's going to make your long-term success is the building the best team of people around you. And a mission is a huge competitive advantage in doing that. Like if you don't have that mission, that can be the kind of the motivating force to bring people into your orbit. All you have is cash. And the thing about startups is you don't tend to have very much cash. So your mission is your competitive advantage. I've never seen it as a restraint on what we're doing.
I think you're absolutely right. I think mission can glue, like you mentioned, those people in your orbit, whether they are your, leadership team all the way to your partners. And you've been leading and stepping forward in your mission. So how did you get your first school, your first university involved? Because I've been in ed tech and I know how difficult the UK education system can be, and it can be quite fragmented. So how did you get that credibility in the market and bring those people into your orbit?
Sure. So, like when I first launched Zero Gravity, I quite naively thought it would be really easy to get institutions on board because at the beginning, we just wanted schools and universities to work with us so we could attract as many students onto our platform as possible. But quite quickly, I kind of ran into the cold, hard reality that actually working with institutions as a startup is really, really difficult because from a kind of school or university's point of view, you're taking a bet on a young, plucky, unproven organization. And often in those kind of institutions, you don't get rewarded for taking risk. No, like your kind of incentives that you have is to actually like minimize risk as much as possible because you can get fired for giving £20,000 to an organization that fails in 4 weeks, but you're unlikely to get promoted by doing something new and innovative. So the kind of incentive structures of organizations like veer away from working with startups. And I kind of recognized that quite quickly and pivoted our initial strategy to actually being able to sign up school students and undergrads without having to partner with institutions whatsoever. So for the first couple of years, we just worked on building a really well-defined brand that people loved and building marketing channels through organic social media, turning our users into brand ambassadors and finding novel growth hacks of how to reach students. So we didn't actually focus at all on institutional partnering in the first couple of years because I just didn't think we had the fundamentals to be able to partner with institutions. Now that's changed recently. We've got over 30% of all the state schools in the UK who are now formally partnered with Zero Gravity, over 700 schools, and also some of the biggest universities in the country. But it took 3 years to get to that point. So I think the lesson out of that is that when you're building a strategy for a startup, like you have to make sure that your strategy is hunkered down in reality and the capability that you've got. And what you'll find is that actually the institutions are very, very difficult to work with at the beginning of your startup journey. So actually sometimes the best strategies are strategies which disintermediate from gatekeeper institutions and allow you to get directly to your audience. And in the long term, you may find a way back into that B2B partnering model. And that can be a really good model in the long term. But in the short term, you have to have a strategy which is hunkered down in reality. And for a lot of startups, that means avoiding institutions rather than trying to partner with them.
Absolutely. I mean, you went straight to your users, and I think that has reaped, once again, that credibility. When you have thousands of students on your platform, that makes it even more enticing and credible to a kind of B2B play. Now, I know you've been in this business now for the past couple of years. It hasn't been easy. So what has been some of like your biggest hurdles in building and scaling Zero Gravity?
I think the thing that people don't necessarily tell you when you're an early stage founder is the importance of network and fundraising. If you're building a business that requires a lot of investment to get going, and most technology businesses do, because you have to invest a lot of money in building a great product before people buy that product, you need to have a great network around you of people who can help you fundraise from investors and kind of point you in the right direction of people to speak to. And I just didn't have that when I started, because I was someone from a northern suburb who didn't really have many professionals in my network. And even though I'd gone to a really good university, I just didn't have that network of kind of angel investors in London around me, kind of inherited from family. So I had to build that from scratch. And I quickly realized that there is a big part of this, which is it's who you know, not what you know. You can have the most incredible business idea in the world and really good execution. But if you need funds to grow your venture, you do also need to become a master of networking and fundraising. That's just a brutal reality. So I started to do that, and it was not very comfortable or intuitive for me because I was a bit of an introvert. I saw networking as a kind of like dirty thing. I didn't sort of like appreciate it as a skill. I kind of associated it with like awkward corporate networking events where you sort of stand in the corner with a slightly room temperature glass of prosecco, and there's people who come and sort of annoy you. So that's
awkward
what I
business
thought.
cards.
Awkward business cards. That's what I thought networking was. But actually, I realized over time, like networking, like isn't that. Networking is a skill you need of how do you bring the right people into your orbit and align people's incentives so both you and the person can get mutual benefit out of your connection. And when it came to zero gravity, I created a kind of media flywheel to bring people into my orbit who could help me grow the business. So most of our original investors, they came to me directly, having read about zero gravity in the mainstream media or having seen our posts on social media and on LinkedIn or Instagram. And then from those original people, that they then introduced me to more people. It became a bit of a domino effect over time. And I can sort of trace back almost every single investor in our company to a couple of initial core contacts, which I had. So I think the most difficult part about building a network is actually going from having zero helpful, high quality people in your network to 100. Well, once you get to 100, going from 100 to 1,000 is much easier because it kind of becomes self-reinforcing. But the first thing you have to concentrate on is how do you get that first 100 people who can help you really grow and scale your business into your orbit. And that's not as simple as kind of just messaging people on LinkedIn. You have to create a really compelling value proposition that those people want to engage with. And then don't just send them the kind of typical cold outreach message. That's just going to fall on deaf ears.
Absolutely. I think you and I probably went through similar experiences, when people are saying, oh, raise from family and friends. And I was like, what family and friends have extra tens of thousands of pounds laying around? I don't have that family and friends.
Yeah, exactly. I thought that phrase was a joke as well, because I thought if I did a whip round of my family and friends, I might like raise like 20 quid and maybe a Freddo on top if I'm lucky, but like certainly not 50k angel investment from your rich uncle. And I think that's a big assumption in the startup sector, which is just reflective of the fact that most startup founders are from affluent backgrounds. There's a great piece of research in Sifted a couple of years ago, which shows that even when you look at pre-VC backed startups and VC backed startups, there's over 75% of the founders of those businesses are from the most affluent backgrounds. And I think that's just a factor of access to capital, but also the ability to take a risk. That taking a risk, if you're from a wealthy background, is not existential. If you fail, it might be slightly embarrassing. You might have wasted a bit of time, but you can get back up and do something else. But if you're from a low income background and you can't rely on the bank, mum and dad, the failure can be catastrophic. Now, that can be your livelihoods. That can be your house. That can be the difference between being able to get by and being on the streets. So for most people, entrepreneurship is just not even a viable option most of the time as a full-time career. And I think people just don't even realize that. I think because so many people in the startup sector are from a certain background, they don't realize just how inaccessible the startup sector is. And that's why you get these phrases which kind of indicate the type of people who actually exist in the sector.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think, there is this breakdown between those who have potential to start incredible businesses, but also the privilege, some have where there is that fallback plan. There is an ATM at home where, your bills are taken care of. I know what it's like to, you probably do too, make payroll during COVID, all of those fun, incredibly stressful moments as a founder. And it's difficult. It is not an easy path to pave. And I guess,
Yeah, it's like when you've got people relying on you, that creates a huge degree of stress because the financial viability of your business doesn't just affect yourself, but other people as well. And I think that is one of the things that people going into entrepreneurship need to bear in mind, that the number one skill, I think, for an early stage entrepreneur is resilience, because it takes time to get going and you have to take a lot of gut punches and sort of fight a lot of battles to be able to get to a point where you start to get some traction. But then even when you do get on that kind of like nice growth path, and the sort of growth path that Zero Gravity has been on for the past couple of years, you still face all sorts of crazy things that just come at you left, right, and center when you least expect it. Like just as you think everything's going well, something will come out of nowhere and hit you over the top of the head. So you have to be a hyper resilient person, because sometimes these questions can be the difference between being able to pay people at the end of the month or not. So you have to be that person who's able to battle through that. And that's why I actually think that founders who are from more low opportunity backgrounds do have a hidden advantage when it comes to entrepreneurship, because in many ways their difficult upbringings are a training ground for resilience. If you think of resilience as a muscle, which is something that you build over time, if you've had to face all of these challenges in your childhood, you're likely to be far more resilient from somebody who's just had everything fall into place for them. So I think people from low income backgrounds and low opportunity areas have resilience in abundance. It's just not being put into good use because actually getting into the startup world is just too difficult.
Exactly. I think there's so much grit. And when you've lived through adversity, the adversity of the startup world, it's not as foreign for someone, who's lived through it, that lived experience. Um, Speaking of that, you work with incredible students across the UK in various ages. What piece of advice would you give them if they came to you and said, Joe, I want to be an entrepreneur?
It's a $1 million question. I think, as I mentioned earlier, earlier in this conversation, it will be start early, because the first couple of ventures are probably likely to fail. So the earlier you start, the quicker you'll actually find something that kind of falls into place. Like, even though I didn't launch kind of formal business prior to Zero Gravity, I'd had various side hustles and things I'd done in the past, which like generated revenue. I'd had to work with clients, or I'd had to build products that people wanted to use. And that was an incredible training for actually becoming an entrepreneur. So my number one piece of advice would be, don't try and wait until the perfect moment with the perfect idea. Actually try and do some pretty rubbish stuff first, just to get some learnings based on both the skills and also the mentality you need to be an entrepreneur. So my number one piece of advice would be start now. And my second piece of advice would be to make sure you're doing something which is incredibly distinctive and creates a product or a service which is at least 50% better than what already exists out there. Because I think I see a lot of young entrepreneurs kind of trying to reinvent the wheel. I think that's most people's kind of instincts when they're starting a business of, I'm just going to reinvent something that already exists. But the truth is, if you're building a startup, people are naturally risk averse. And if you want people to use your product rather than the established products in the market, like, you can't just be 10% better than what already exists. You have to be 50% better. So my advice to young entrepreneurs would be, like, really clearly define when you're creating a business, like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Like, why is this an important problem? What do you understand about that problem that other people don't? And then why is your solution 50% better than what already exists? Or why could it be 50% better if you got to a certain point? And that sounds like pretty basic stuff, but I think a lot of people don't think that through incredibly carefully. and that they run into something where they just end up reinventing the wheel, and then they get confused why they don't become an overnight success. And that's because actually building something takes time, no matter what you do. But also, it's very difficult to get lift off if you're just reinventing the wheel. Like, you have to be different. So, like, pretty mundane, obvious advice, but that is the thing I see people doing wrong quite consistently.
No, I think you're absolutely right, because it requires that, zooming out to really see, how you differentiate yourself. And I think that's really, really valid advice. So, Joe, what is up next for you? I know you've been all over the media. I think there was a piece this week from startups. And what is next for Zero Gravity? What can we look out for?
Yeah, no, it's quite weird seeing zero gravity sort of plastered all over social media and all the PR nowadays. And it just shows you that kind of virtuous circle effect, which is, getting PR and social traction was so difficult when I first started. But now I think this year we've had over 50 tier one media features in, like, top broadsheet publications and TV. We get millions of impressions on social media every month now, and that would have been something that was unfathomable a couple of years ago. But we just got into that virtuous circle of building and building and building over time. And in terms of what's up next, like for us, like, we want to continue scaling our platform to power more students into top universities. We've supported over 8,000 students from low opportunity backgrounds into top unis to date, but we've got 10,000 on the platform this year applying right now. So those numbers are increasing exponentially, and we want to continue pushing that. But the other thing that we're doing as well is also focusing on how do we get students into top internships, apprenticeships, and graduate careers. That is a increasing focus for us, because going to a top university is great and really helpful, but it doesn't kick the ball in the back of the net. There's still that next stage of how do you get access to a great career. And we're working with a number of the UK's leading employers now to really level the playing field when it comes to access to these elite professions. And I think that's really exciting, because I think what we hopefully will see, if we're able to get that right, is we can create a real demographic shift in who actually works in some of these leading companies. In the same way there's started to be a demographic shift in universities, I think that same trend can come to some of the UK's leading employers as well. And the ripple effect of that is that there'll be different people in those rooms making decisions, and that will lead to better outcomes, not just for those individuals, but for all of society. Because as we say at Zero Gravity, that when talent wins, everyone wins. So I don't just see this about individual empowerment. Like, this is actually about creating a more meritocratic, dynamic world that works for everyone, and that's what we're trying to do, I suppose.
I think that's incredible. It's a whole systems change. It's not. It starts at the individual, but the ripple effects that Zero Gravity is going to have throughout universities, workplace, and everywhere in between. I know I am so excited to look forward to it. So, Joe, if someone wants to connect, or if someone listening wants to sign up for Zero Gravity, where can they find you?
Yeah, so Zero Gravity is at zerogravity.co.uk. You can sign up in around 2 minutes. And then if anyone wants any advice on breaking into the weird, wacky world of entrepreneurship, or wants to know more about Zero Gravity, just ping me a DM on LinkedIn.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Joe. It's been an absolute honor to speak with you, and I am looking forward to seeing the lasting impact of Zero Gravity.
Awesome. Good stuff, Caitlin. Great to be on the podcast.